Now let me introduce our guest speaker from London, John Alexander. John is a consultant, professional change maker, and inspirational speaker, and is motivated by a strong belief in the potential of the citizen to create a better world. He is the founder and the director of New Citizenship Project, which is a social innovation lab established in 2014 to help catalyse the shift to a more participatory society. Previously, he worked in brand and marketing at the National Trust, where, amongst many things, he founded the Wild Network to bring the National Trust together with the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, the NHS, and over 100 other organisations to get children back into nature. Before joining the Trust, John spent most of his career in London advertising agencies and also lived in Zambia for a year working for a small charity. We first came across John at the European Cultural Foundation's 2014 Ideas Camp at Marseille in France, and we've been close friends and collaborators ever since. We're thrilled to be able to have John inaugurate our 2016 seminar series and absolutely delighted to welcome him to Liverpool. Please welcome John to the podium.
This is good. I feel like I've got kind of Simon Cowell and no. So I'm gonna kind of roam around a bit. Just give me one moment, a quick technical moment. There we go. So yes, my name's John Alexander. I'm going to talk for about half an hour, but we're going to punctuate that with a bit of conversation and try and bring you guys into it. The brief from Jerry was kind of open up this thing about citizens to consumers. Like this is a bit of language that these are two words that we use quite lazily. This is something that he and I have talked about quite a lot. The concepts that are actually really big and important, and we work with them as New Citizenship Project a great deal. So there's sort of two movements to what I'm going to talk about this evening. I'm going to spend a little bit of time up front in what you might call the theory bit. And then see how you guys feel about that, get you to talk to one another about that. And then I'm going to talk a bit more specifically about some of the most exciting examples I've seen, because a big part of our work as New Citizenship Project is keeping an eye out, kind of trend spotting really, looking around the world for where some of the most exciting opportunities and most exciting projects are going on. And really try and, I suppose my ultimate objective this evening, and the reason why I've given myself the kind of first question, how can Liverpool lead Britain into the age of the citizen? Like, I believe fundamentally that actually this city could be a really kind of exciting place at the moment. Liverpool is almost uniquely well endowed to lead a really big societal change, and I'm going to try and imbue you with that same confidence that I feel. And then we'll kind of open up that conversation and see where we go, and these guys will tell me that I'm talking nonsense, and then hopefully you'll back me up a bit, and then we'll get into a quite nice conversation. So, without further ado, let me say a bit more about, just very quickly, just to situate New Citizenship Project. So, we're a consultancy of sorts. As Jerry says, my background's in advertising and brand consultancy originally, and has been a journey of ever deeper self-hatred for doing that kind of work. And now the way we talk about ourselves, we still use a lot of the same skills. It's still about using creative ideas and inspiration and excitement, but not just to flog people stuff. Not just to sell stuff to people as consumers, but to help organisations do things differently and think of people differently as participants in causes, as a fundamental of human nature, that we are participatory creatures and not just as consumers of products. We do just to give you a sense that we are not just a total blagger. We do have some pretty impressive organisations on the list of who we work with at the moment. I'm not going to show off too much about that, but it's always just nice for people to think that they're, I think, listening to someone who's got some sort of track record at least. So that's why I put that up. I'm not trying to show off. And then the thing. So let's get into the theory stuff then. So we talk about a concept called the citizen shift. And this is this idea of a shift from consumers to citizens. And we published a report at the end of last year called The Citizen Shift. And that's the URL down the bottom, citizenshift.info. So if you find what I talk about in the next 20 minutes very interesting, then go and dig into it a little bit more. Fundamentally, what we work with is an idea that there's an evolution. Here I start to get into my profound space. There's an evolution going on in the role of the individual in society, and we believe it's a shift from something like from subject to consumer to citizen. And when I use those words, I'm not just talking about we're subjects in relation to, I don't know, royalty, we're consumers in relation to business, we're citizens in relation to government. I'm using those words at a kind of loftier level. I think of these as almost as moral concepts, moral ideas. And I think the way we think society works is that we go between different roles all the time, that we're parents and shareholders and employees and citizens and consumers, and we move between these things. But what we believe, and the ideas we work with, say that actually at any given time, one of those roles elevates up and starts to inform all of the others with the logic that it holds. And that level of story, that level of idea is changing over time. And if we go back, so broadly, this is a story of the last 150 years or so. If we go back 150 years, and it's primarily UK focused and US, but with broader application, we were something like subjects. The right thing to do was something like keep your head down, do as you're told, and if everyone does that, if everyone does their duty, then we'll all be looked after, and the best society kind of results from that. And our argument is that story kind of fell apart and fell in on itself during the early 20th century and through the middle of the 20th century. And out of the two world wars, almost quite deliberately actually, a very different idea of who we are came into being and became that loftier notion. And that was the consumer. And as consumers, so if as subjects the right thing to do is keep your head down, do as you're told. As consumers, the right thing to do is get the best deal for number one. Look out for number one. Choose the best deal for you from the options that are offered. And if everyone does that, then the best society will result. And so in that sense, a kind of moral idea. And the interesting bit for me, and where we get all of our excitement from, is we go, what's happening now, this fascinating time in history that we're living in, that story feels like it's falling in on itself. And what's bubbling up is an idea of people actually as something like citizens. So if subject is keep your head down as you're told, consumers get the best deal for yourself, look out for number one. Citizen is something like get involved, shape the context of your own life, step into your own agency. Don't just make the choice, shape what the choices are. And the excitement that comes for us. We're still in the era of the consumer. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we've cracked this, but there is something bubbling and changing, and we haven't quite named it yet, and we haven't quite got onto it yet. But we think this idea of the citizen is a great way to describe it. One of the ways I like to kind of introduce this and paint the picture is by talking about the year 1984. Now, this is I mean, obviously, as a storyteller, when you find that there is some sort of resonance in something like the year 1984, you feel very smug and happy. So you can grab onto George Orwell's coattails and go, "I'm coming with you." But what 1984 really shows us, the events of 1984 show us, is the idea of the consumer not as a kind of evil. I think we tend to talk about consumerism kind of lazily. We talk about it as if it's an unalloyed bad. But actually, when it comes into being, if you think the shift from subject to consumer is a massively liberating shift. And I love the first story that I love of the year 1984. The year starts with the most famous advertisement in history. So as an ex-ad man, my historical construction comes from there. And it's the ad that launched the Apple Macintosh. It was directed by Ridley Scott. It was the first ad that took over the full commercial break in the Super Bowl. And it was a takeoff of Big Brother and Orwell's 1984. Troops of drones walking down a corridor, and Big Brother's voice in the background. A young woman comes on and smashes the screen with a hammer. And this voiceover, this amazing voiceover, comes on and says, "On January 24th, Apple will release Macintosh, and you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984," in a much more convincing American accent, just to be clear. But the thing about that is what they were saying is they weren't just launching a computer, right? They weren't just saying there's a new thing that you could buy. They were saying there's a new era. They were basically launching, they were coining consumerism as a golden idea. They were saying, you want this, you want something now, you don't just have to take the one option that's available, that you're king now, you're in charge. And this picture kind of colours in through the year. So Apple Mac launched at the beginning of the year. Virgin Atlantic launched that same year. So doing the same thing, doing an analogous job in a different market on this side of the Atlantic. But also, so two of the kind of icon consumer brands launched that year. Also, The Body Shop floated on the stock exchange that year, bringing with it the idea that you can buy stuff to save the planet, essentially. Band-Aid, the first Band-Aid, let's be clear. The first Band-Aid was that year, bring with it the idea you can buy stuff to solve global poverty. And most fascinatingly, I think, of all, the Los Angeles Olympics were that year. And the LA Olympics were the first Olympics ever to be funded by commercial sponsorship. The LA essentially had the IOC over a barrel, right? They were the only city to apply to host those Olympics because all previous Olympics had lost money. And they said the condition of us doing this is we're going to take commercial sponsorship. So the LA Olympics became the symbol that we can buy stuff to fund global sport and culture as well. And so you have in this kind of golden dream. But obviously, I'm speaking in Liverpool, right? The 80s didn't do great things for everybody. If you'll forgive my reference, and this story hasn't worked. Fundamentally, these ideas that we could buy stuff to solve all our problems and have this golden dream hasn't come through. And yet we're still pursuing it. So I was unlucky enough to be at the World Economic Forum last year. And walking along the road, I saw this poster on the side of the Indian delegation's building. India, world's largest middle-class consumer market by 2030, join India, lead the world. And an image of a thoroughly kind of westernized family in a shopping mall as the kind of golden dream that we're pursuing. And yet, as I say, we kind of know this isn't functioning. And so what the next thing we started to do was start to dig into some of the psychology around this. And we did some really interesting experiments. And my favorite, and kind of the one that scares me most of these, was a Wells scenario. So we just did social psychology experiments. We put surveys out to people and we framed them differently and saw what came back. With this one, what we did was we gave 2,000 people, a scenario test. We said, you're one of 4 households dependent on a single well for your water supply. The well's starting to run dry. And so you need to use less water. The 4 households between you need to use less water. And then we asked 2 questions. Firstly, to what extent would you as an individual household be prepared to use less water? And secondly, to what extent would you trust the other 3 households to use less water? And the clever bit was this, for half the sample, for 1,000 people, it was pretty much framed exactly as I've just said it to you. For the other half, it was framed in terms of consumers. You're one of 4 consumers dependent on a single well. To what extent would you trust the other consumers, etc.? And the people who answered the scenario where the word was consumer rather than household were significantly less likely to be willing to use less water and significantly less likely to trust the other households as well. And that isn't consciously processed. These were nationally representative samples, kind of just that one word. And then off the back of that, we started to play with some of these ideas and go, well, what's this doing? And then this data is a little more kind of chunky, but what we did essentially was we asked 3,000 people this time 2 questions. To what extent do you think it's important to participate actively in society? And to what extent do you think it's important to be involved in your local community? Now, the blue column were only asked those 2 questions. The yellow column, before they saw those 2 questions, they were asked, to what extent do you agree that everyone is born equal? The red column, before they saw those 2 questions, were asked, to what extent do you agree that it's important to find brands that fit your personality? So we used a kind of normative statement of consumer logic, a normative kind of citizen concept. This data is regardless of the extent to which people agree with those first questions. If you saw the question about brands being important to find brands that fit your personality, you were significantly less likely to agree with the question that it's important to participate actively in society, and much more significantly less likely to say it's important to be involved in your local community. Now this is really hard to overstate what this sort of thing means. Like you're not consciously processing this. You're not kind of dwelling in it. You're just seeing and ticking a box. But just by having read that sentence, you're priming yourself not to participate. And then so working as I did when I was starting to do this kind of work in the advertising industry, And the first brief that was given to me is, your job, the average consumer is exposed to 3,000 commercial messages a day. Your job is to cut through that. But what is the 3,000 doing? We're telling ourselves not to participate, is my argument, that regularly. So we live in this world where we're kind of conditioning ourselves not to do this stuff. But, and this is where, there's this analysis that goes, hang on, there's something wrong, there's something deeply kind of undermining of humanity in the story we're telling ourselves. But we still live in this really exciting time where things are bubbling up all over the place that just don't fit with that logic. And they're becoming so strong that they don't just look like anomalies anymore. And I'm going to come into some in the second sort of half of what I want to talk about, where we directly link to cities and what's bubbling up at city level. But just to paint some of the pictures. So if the LA Olympics was a symbol of consumerism, was a kind of coining of the golden age of the consumer, the London Olympics and the games makers and the whole vibe that was created by the opening ceremony, that's a very different story, potentially. I'm not saying it's fully formed, I'm not saying it's landed, but there's something very different there that we could be looking back on in history as a defining moment. There are also some brands and organisations starting to form that I would say are potentially could be the defining brands, could become the defining organisations of the citizen era, and they're businesses as well, but business operating in a very different way. My first example, and I'd really recommend check out these guys on Medium in particular. The Correspondent, it's a Dutch news brand, and the founding story is wonderful. Rob Weinberg was the youngest ever editor of a Dutch national daily newspaper. And he basically got the job pretty much directly out of university off the back of writing a book called Nietzsche and Kant Read the News, so he's a bit of a geek. But Rob started to move, I think it was Handelsblad or something like that, in the direction, so his whole thesis was about the news has become consumer entertainment, not citizen equipment, right? And he said, right, we need to push the news in the direction of being something that enables people to be citizens, not just entertains people and sells advertising space. And he got fired. But don't put your head in your hands. What happened then was he got together with a couple of the best journalists, and they went on a Dutch national talk show, and they said, if we can get 20,000 people to pay a year's subscription up front, a kind of classic crowdfunder, 60 euros each, then we'll go away for 6 months and we'll launch a different news brand. They got 45,000 people in 8 days. And within 6 months, they'd launched the Correspondent. But the fascinating thing about the Correspondent isn't just the editorial angle, it's the mode of operation. So there's a lovely piece on Medium where they talk about their philosophy, which is we don't call them journalists, we call them conversation leaders. And we don't call them readers, we call them expert contributors. And the idea of the Correspondent is that every piece is an inquiry, an ongoing inquiry, led by a conversation leader, but with the participation of the citizens into what's going on in that society. Really different attitude to news, and one that we're working quite closely with The Guardian at the moment and talking to them a lot about what could that be part of their role? How could they embrace that kind of function? And you may have seen the Guardian's Liverpool and Labour project recently. The second example, the second business I just wanted to touch on, and I'll do this one very quickly, but Brewdog, so just to say that this doesn't have to be heavy and worthy, this is a really cool beer brand, but it's the fastest growing food and drink brand in the country, and the fascinating thing about Brewdog is that they're kind of heading towards reinventing the cooperative. Like they're doing a massive job on co-ownership, and they basically invented the concept of crowd equity. They started 2007. They managed to win a competition that Tesco were running to get their beers listed in supermarkets. They got to 2009. They were like, we need to get some funding, some investment into this. Do we go the traditional way and then we lose our spirit and what we want to be about? Or do we try and do something else? And they like I say, they invented crowd equity and crowdfunding. This is now sort of quite an established thing. You've got websites like Crowdcube that they used for their last round, this Crowdfunder, all these sorts of things. But in 2009, they didn't exist. They had to do it themselves. And now Brewdog is a brand that is co-owned by 46,000 of their customers. And every time they do an equity round, all of their bottles become taken over by this thing. And what's so fascinating is that as a result of operating in this way, BrewDog are held to account in a very different function, right? So BrewDog were one of the first employers in the UK to become a living wage employer. They have won awards for the pioneering eco-brewery. They're essentially a kind of movement with a product rather than a brand. And so it doesn't have to be a kind of big worthy thing, but there's some very different stuff going on. Now I've put a picture of monkeys up, which I have to explain. So the last thing I want to do, just before I start a bit of conversation and see what you think of this, see what it means to you, is just talk about two drivers. And the first of these is a changing conversation about human nature. I think the underlying, the sort of the thing that sets the logic of the consumer in stone is this lazy myth that human beings are fundamentally selfish. And while that myth is accepted, there is very little we can do to challenge this story. This won't break. But what's coming out of evolutionary biologists, what's coming out of animal behavior specialists is a huge challenge to that story. And this lovely shot, if there's one thing you do in follow-up to this evening, go and watch Frans de Waal's TED Talk on moral behavior in animals. And this is a shot from that. This is a shot from an experiment that was later published under the title of Monkeys Demand Equal Pay for Equal Work. And I love this particularly because when I was working in advertising and starting to develop this, one of my bosses there said, just give it up, John. Like, lovely, idealistic stuff, but humans are just nasty monkeys. We're fun. And the lovely thing about this is that I can now say that humans are not just nasty monkeys because monkeys are not just nasty monkeys. So this experiment, basically what happens is that the monkey does a task, passes a stone through the window and then is given a treat. So monkey 1 passes a stone through the window, is given a bit of cucumber, eats the cucumber. Monkey 2 passes a stone through the window and is given a grape, eats the grape. Now monkeys, capuchin monkeys these are, prefer grapes to cucumber. So we go back to monkey 1, passes a stone through the window, is given a cucumber. This time, looks at cucumber, reaches out the window, throws cucumber at researcher. And what happens but the fascinating thing is in a significant proportion of these experiments, the monkey given the grape starts to refuse the grape. So this is monkeys in solidarity. It's a wonderful experiment for just saying, actually this idea that selfishness, the selfish gene, is the fundamental driver of human evolution. I know I'm taking Dawkins' language in a sense that he wouldn't necessarily accept, but that's how it's come to be understood. There's something, collaboration and empathy are as much drivers of evolution as competition and status. And as that story beds in, we are starting to tell a different story of human nature, and that is what will enable us to embrace these opportunities. The second driver is tech, right? And so this, I'm a big fan of Marshall McLuhan, 60s media philosopher. He had two great phrases. The first was, the medium is the message, by which he means that the dominant medium of a society comes to shape the way we interact as a society. So in a society dominated by television, we become one to many. We choose between things, we select options, but fundamentally we're largely on receive, right? And it's not just in terms of the media we consume, but how we act. Think about representative democracy, for example. Like, we choose between the options, we choose what's best for us right now, rather than getting involved. In the age of the internet, the potential is very different, right? I'm not an internet apologist, and I'll come on to that in a second, but the potential, at least, is for a many-to-many society. And then the second phrase, which explains my attitude to the web, is he says, first we shape our tools, and then our tools shape us. So first we shape our tools. We built the internet essentially as consumers. We built a marketplace. But then our tools shape us. If the potential of the web is for this participatory society, then it is starting, I believe, to shape us as citizens. Whether we can fill that and bring that through is a challenge, but it's there. So, we summarise this in our report, and there's more lines in the table, but with this table, and this is what I just invite you just to take a couple of minutes, maybe pick someone who you met before, and just have a little chat about, where do you recognise these in your own life? When have you been a subject? When have you been a consumer? When have you been a citizen? And how did they feel? Like, what did it feel like to be those? And the point I'm making here is, these things, we're not just this isn't a binary kind of on-off thing. We're not going to switch off the consumer and become citizens and everything. But it's about the dominant story. And at the moment, my argument is the dominant story of our society is that we're consumers, that this is that in being independent, having stuff done for us, demanding things, choosing things, and being served is what we expect. But that actually there's a much more creative and generative space opening up, which is about interdependence, it's about doing things with each other, it's about participation, creation, and being facilitated, not just served or commanded. So I'm just going to invite you I've sort of dumped a whole load of stuff onto you. So I'm just going to invite you just to take a few minutes, have a chat to someone, just give you a couple of minutes, and then we'll come back with a few kind of quick-fire examples of where this is rocking the world of cities globally, and then we'll kind of see where we go from there. Is that cool? Good. Buzz.
Great.
Okay, I hate to break up a conversation that I've started, but I'm just gonna give you a little bit more stimulus, and then we're gonna start building towards the kind of room conversation, and these guys are gonna cut chunks off me. So if I can just have you guys back for a little more stuff. Good. So I'm just going to give you a few of my favourite examples of where I think this phenomenon, this story, this citizen shift is starting to happen in cities around the world and in bits in London as well. But I don't think will ever happen most fully in London because it's too much of the heart of the consumer story. So the first, and what these examples are really about is about a combination of the bottom three lines, really. It's not just about, for me, it's not just about citizens, kind of the grassroots, the bottom up, kind of coming together and participating more and creating more. It's also about the institutions adopting this role as facilitators, thinking of themselves differently, about local authorities saying, actually, we're here to enable, not here to deliver or to command. And my first, and I'll sort of build up into these, the first example that I love is the phenomenon of local currency. I don't know if there is a local currency in Liverpool, but in Brixton, just down the road from where I live, firstly it's just cool because they've put David Bowie on their £10 note. But more significantly, like local currency is actually a really fascinating phenomenon that's just starting to grow up at the moment. So you've got, the way it works is you're pitched at kind of, it costs nine English pounds to buy 10 Brixton pounds. That difference is enough to keep money circulating in the local economy, therefore sustaining local trade and building local business and keeping the money circulating there. But also kind of cultivating the culture and the character of that place. This is spreading all over the world. There's something like 4,000 complementary currencies of this sort in circulation now. And I think it's just a fascinating phenomenon. The second thing, and again in this sort of space of democratizing finance, is crowdfunding. And I particularly love the Space Hive, the platform Space Hive in this country, which has done through them some really interesting work has been done in Liverpool, I believe. There was a flyover. Someone may know more than me. But one of my favourite examples of where Space Hive is going at the moment, they've just started working with the Mayor of London, and I think this is where the real promise is. Again, it's that thing about institutions reaching out and meeting people, where the Mayor's office committed to putting funding in to the projects that reached a certain sort of tip-over level. So there's a kind of validation partnership between the two things, which is really interesting. My third example is really the whole city of and the mayor of Calgary as a human being, who I'm slightly in love with. But Naheed Nenshi is the first Muslim mayor of a North American city, has done amazing things on reaching out to refugees and all sorts of things. But the best, arguably, he would say the best thing that he's done was when he was running for office, his campaign was not about elect me, I'll do this. His campaign was a grassroots campaign called Three Things for Calgary, which was all about everyone name the 3 things that you're going to do for the city this year. Use Walter Wisley. The next one I wanted to chuck in is Reykjavik. People may have come across this. This is probably a little more famous. That Better Reykjavik is essentially, really simply, a kind of Reddit-style online platform for people to kind of to come up with ideas for legislation that should be part of the city statute and upvote it and downvote it. But the thing about Better Reykjavik is that they've come into a really good constructive relationship with the city, where there's a commitment to taking something like 15 ideas a year through to formal, at least formal debate, and I think over 200 ideas have actually come into the city statute from citizens as a result, and over 70% of the population have participated in this. So this is not a kind of worthy sort of minority civic core thing. This is a mass thing, and it's now expanded into a function called Better Neighbourhoods, which is one of the slickest examples I've seen of what's called participatory budgeting, where effectively citizens of Reykjavik allocate a significant proportion of the local budgets to key projects. And the way they do it is they get the full budget, and they say here's where I'd allocate it to, and then that data is aggregated up, and then what the citizenry as a whole kind of believes should be funded gets funded. And again, they're building this up, so they haven't started by going right, crack over the whole budget, but equally they haven't started, as a lot of participatory budgeting things in this country have done, with a kind of entirely theoretical exercise which basically gets nobody wanting to participate. They've done it with real stuff that's close to people's lives. And my last example actually is kind of big policy again, but going right back to square one. And Mexico City, city of 9 million people, is, I think, currently still in the process of crowdsourcing a constitution for the city, which is a really fascinating experiment they're doing through Change.org, the online petition platform. And the idea is that any proposal that gets more than 10,000 signatures gets to be represented in the lawmaking forum. And then they're also using an online platform called PubPub, which is basically a bit like a kind of wiki, a bit like a wiki, where people can then edit the legislation, the constitutional draft, as it's in progress. It's really fascinating. So this stuff is big, and it's happening. And I guess, so this brings me to my kind of concluding couple of points. So, firstly, I think I just feel like Liverpool is the place where this has such a natural home in this country, right? Like, from City of Culture, the kind of extreme success of that. There's so much bubbling already. I get emails from Liverpool Soup and the Social Enterprise Network, and there's some real vibe here. And Graham, like, the city effectively just won the Turner Prize, right? Like for a civic regeneration project. That's cool. And then this happens, and you're like, that is my language. Like, come on here. So I feel like there's something bubbling here which says that this isn't a city that did beautifully out of the ear of the consumer, right? But it's a city that could really lead into the ear of the citizen. And my last thing, I just wanted to leave you with one of my favourite quotes, again, slightly overused, but Margaret Mead, an anthropologist and activist, once said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." So with that, I just wanted to ask you guys another question while you have a bit of a chance to and give these guys a bit of a chance to think about how they're going to take me apart. And just have a bit of a conversation again amongst yourselves. What do you see this in Liverpool? I'd love to know more examples. For me, selfishly, I'd love to go home with some stuff to go, this is happening here. And what more could be done? So have another buzz, and then we're going to kind of start to build back to the room conversation, I think. Over to you. Okay?
Okay, can I call you all back so that we can have a conversation, everyone together? First of all, can I just thank John for that presentation? I hope you found that the words I used earlier, being an inspirational speaker, was actually not an exaggeration. It's a good description. So can we just thank John for his input so far? Thank you.